Welcome back, focused learners, to another explainer. Today, we're stepping right up to the geopolitical chessboard of global supply chains. Now, we constantly hear about oil, semiconductors, and lithium, right? But today, we're going to look at a relatively obscure yet absolutely vital mineral that serves as the literal glue connecting modern defense capabilities and advanced technology. It's a wild story full of market dominance, trade wars, and a frantic global scramble for resource independence.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our agenda for today. We'll be tracking the strategic maneuvers of global powers across 6 key areas: the invisible strategic mineral, China's market choke point, export bans and trade truces, India's critical minerals mission, the North American scramble, and finally, the new geopolitical reality.
Starting right off with Section 1, the invisible strategic mineral.
So, I want you to think about this. What connects the armor-piercing rounds used by modern militaries to the incredibly complex circuitry inside the smartphone in your pocket? The answer is antimony. On the periodic table, it's symbol Sb. It's a metalloid extracted from an ore called stibnite. Now, fascinatingly enough, ancient civilizations actually used this exact stuff as eye makeup. But today, it's officially designated as a critical mineral by countries like the US and Canada. Without it, our national security, our energy grids, and our high-tech manufacturing lines would literally just break down.
Let's fire off exactly what this stuff does, because its applications are absolutely crucial. For defense, we're talking armor-piercing ammo, explosives, and advanced infrared detectors. In your daily life, it's the flame-retardant coating on your plastics, textiles, and electronics. It's even the crucial hardening agent used in lead-acid batteries and semiconductors. It's become a highly contested piece on the global chessboard simply because you cannot build modern tech or a modern military without it.
Moving on to Section 2, China's market choke point.
Now, if this mineral is so incredibly valuable, it begs the question, who actually controls it? Well, what's really interesting here is the massive imbalance in global supply. China is by far the world's leading producer, commanding nearly 80% of the entire global antimony supply. And they don't just dig the raw ore out of the ground, they completely dominate the downstream processing and refining. Over the course of decades, they've masterfully converted a raw material advantage into a near-total global monopoly.
To really ground this data in physical reality, picture a front loader shifting massive piles of raw materials at a busy port in Lianyugong, China. When 80% of a critical resource is funneled through highly centralized, single-nation choke points like these ports, it creates a terrifying vulnerability for everyone else. Think about it. If these shipments stop, Western and Indian manufacturing lines for things like electric vehicles, smartphones, and munitions would grind to an absolute halt.
Which brings us to Section 3, export bans and trade truces.
So what exactly happens when market dominance is transformed into a tool of economic statecraft? Over the last couple of years, we've watched a massive tit-for-tat escalation unfold. In July 2023, China started requiring licenses for gallium and germanium exports. By September 2024, they added antimony to that list. Then in December 2024, they issued an outright export ban directed specifically at the US, which was a calculated response to Washington's restrictions on semiconductor equipment. However, as of November 2025, during a meeting in Busan, President Xi and President Trump negotiated a one-year suspension of these controls.
But we can't ignore the shockwaves these policy maneuvers caused. They were incredibly severe. When that initial licensing shift for antimony was announced in late 2024, global prices for the mineral absolutely skyrocketed, surging by 200%. This proves just how quickly a sudden policy shift, or frankly, even just the threat of restricted access, can send shockwaves through global supply chains, catching entire industries totally off guard.
A recent analysis by supply chain firm Resilient totally hit the nail on the head regarding this. They noted export regulation has become a live variable in supply planning as influential as cost or capacity. And you have to remember, the current suspension of export controls negotiated in Busan isn't some return to open free trade. It's simply managed permission. The paperwork is temporarily replacing the prohibition, but the underlying leverage, that remains entirely intact.
Let's pivot to Section 4, India's critical minerals mission. As trade wars continually disrupt markets, other nations are executing some bold night maneuvers of their own to secure their supply chains. So the crucial point here is this massive figure, 34,000 crore rupees. Through their 2025 Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Act, the Indian government allocated this massive sovereign fund exclusively for their national critical minerals mission. It marks a huge pivot,
They're moving from defensive, reactive measures to an aggressive, proactive hunt for antimony, lithium, and rare earths.
So how exactly are they deploying this war chest? Well, it's a very deliberate three-pronged approach. Domestically, they're backing 1,200 exploration projects utilizing high-resolution geological mapping. Internationally, they're actively targeting 50 overseas mine acquisitions. And concurrently, they're leveraging strategic trade pacts, like the Australia-India Economic Cooperation Trade Agreement, to eliminate tariffs and secure minerals from alternative, friendly markets.
But honestly, it's how they are executing this that's so brilliant. Traditionally, India's overseas mineral acquisitions were handled by public sector undertakings, these state-owned enterprises that were frankly just too slow and bureaucratic to compete on a global scale. The new strategy involves a much more agile hybrid model. They're pairing sovereign government backing with the entrepreneurial speed of India's vast global diaspora. By setting up specialized entities, agile private firms can execute deals swiftly in places like Africa and Australia while still being fully backed by the financial and diplomatic muscle of the Indian state.
Next up, Section 5, the North American Scramble. Now, this scramble isn't isolated to just India. North America is racing to counter its own immense vulnerabilities. We're seeing an absolute frenzy of domestic funding and project greenlighting. Over in Idaho, Perpetua Resources finally pushed its stibnite project through an 8-year permitting maze, aiming to supply over 100 million pounds of antimony and meet about a third of U.S. demand. Up north, Canadian miners like New Age Metals are aggressively staking new claims, and the U.S. Defense Department just injected a massive $400 million directly into MP Materials, essentially establishing a price floor to guarantee the military gets the supply it desperately needs.
What you really have to understand here is that these North American efforts aren't just about finding a quick replacement for Chinese antimony. The goal is vastly more ambitious. They are actively attempting to build an entirely independent, parallel ecosystem of extraction, processing, and manufacturing right from the ground up. It's all about decoupling the absolute most critical aspects of defense and high-tech manufacturing from relying on a strategic competitor.
Finally, we reach Section 6, the new geopolitical reality. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where we stand today. Mark this date, November 10, 2026. This is the expiration date of the current one-year suspension of China's export controls. The market stability we are experiencing right this very second isn't lasting peace. It's just a temporary grace period. It's a ticking countdown clock that is forcing private industries and governments alike to use this incredibly narrow window to prepare for the next inevitable policy cycle. Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. As the US, India, and other nations pour billions upon billions into building their own parallel supply chains, are we truly entering a new era of resource independence? Or, as global trade fragments into isolated regional blocks, are we simply trading one set of deep vulnerabilities for another? The geopolitics of obscure minerals like antimony are going to dictate the future of our technology and global security for decades to come. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, stay focused, and I'll catch you in the next one.